Yes.
I would like to pick up a point. Yeah, because there was a survey recently, and it shows that our nation, the distribution of income between the lowest and the highest earners and the lowest earners in our society, the gap is greatest here in any other country in the world apart from Brazil or something of that sort. Now, you guys have had 13 years to get this sorted out, yet still this country has the biggest gulf between the rich and the poor of any advanced nation.
Yeah. Richard, when Luke said his bit, you have a chance to respond to that.
Thank you. I'm a spiritualist, so I'm going to give a slightly different perspective on what I think the answer to this question is. When we're born here, on this earth, we decide, before we got here, what lessons we're going to learn. And it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what those lessons are. The point is that you try, right? The people that you meet on your journey through life are there to help you to learn your lessons. And shocking as this may sound, that includes the cases that we consider unjust and difficult. But that is our challenge, to face those things, to help the people who've been affected by those actions and those lessons. That's all. Thank you.
Richard, do you want to come back?
Yes, I read that survey, and I think you're right in what it says. I'm not sure it was in the world, but certainly in the developed world. What has happened in the last 30, probably more years in the UK, is that, as you say, the income gap, the Gini coefficient in the jargon, has grown. But what has also happened under Labour, which, if not that survey, then commentary of it did point out, is that the incomes of people at the lowest end of the income scale have risen. And it is why we introduced the national minimum wage, historic policy in this country, to ensure that the lowest amount that anyone could get for working was at a decent level, and we've increased that year on year, and we will carry on doing so. We've also brought in a minimum guarantee for pensioners, so that incomes in old age are better than they were under previous governments. What has happened, though, is that those incomes at the top of the scale have gone off the chart due to various things that have happened in the city. Some of that is now being taxed, thank goodness, but that is why we've seen that marked increase in the disparity of wealth.
As I say, I'm not a socialist, but I do think we need to do something about this, and that's why the Liberal Democrats have the most far-reaching redistributive tax policy, in as much as we are proposing that no one will pay any tax at all on the first £10,000 that they earn. So we're not talking about people on benefits. People who are working and who are earning will be able to earn £10,000 without paying any tax, and that will be paid for by a mansion tax, Vince's famous mansion tax. I can look around the room, I suspect there's some people who thought they were going to be got by this tax when it was set at £1 million. It's now going to be set at £2 million, so maybe there's a few less people. But if you own a property valued at over £2 million, then you will pay a tax on the value of that property over £2 million, not on the £2 million, but the amount over it. And that's one of the ways we will finance this cut in income tax for millions of people. There are other ways. We'll be closing tax loopholes. So, for example, you will know that, sorry to get too much into the economics of this, but you will know that capital gains tax, perhaps, is much lower than is the income tax that you would pay. So some people have been using that to avoid paying a higher rate of tax. And it is a scandal that the richest people in our country pay a lower percentage of tax than the very poorest people. That is wrong. That is unjust. And therefore we have to address that. So there will be closing of tax loopholes, higher rate pension tax relief, which I benefit from, will go. And so will those other taxes will be introduced in order to fund a massive reduction in income tax for everybody. £700 in everyone's pockets, and of course it would be an amazing blessing for people on very low incomes.
I'm afraid this just sort of rather proves the old political question. Everything boils down to tax and spend, even when you ask a question about justice and fairness. But I just want to make a comment, if I could, about what Richard said and what Mike said, because first of all, Richard's point about what has happened under Labour in the last 13 years, I think that Labour had exactly the right motivations in terms of its desire to tackle poverty. But unfortunately, it has failed dismally. There are actually 250,000 more families with children growing up in extreme poverty, that is 40% less than median income, than there were in 1997. It is a huge increase. And the reason is because I think that Gordon Brown, because it was mainly Gordon Brown as Chancellor who's been the architect of Labour's policies in this area, Gordon Brown has seen poverty in largely financial terms. And so what the tax credit system has done is it has lifted a lot of people from just below the poverty line to just above the poverty line, without actually tackling the real heart of the problem, which is what Ian Duncan Smith did a lot of work on in his social justice report. But things like drug addiction, things like worklessness, things like broken families, these are things that actually are very, very key causes of poverty. And so I think we need to have a broader understanding of what causes poverty if we're going to really tackle this problem. With respect to the Lib Dem tax cut, I mean, I'm a tax-cutting Tory. I believe if you're going to have an opportunity society, we need to lighten the tax burden as much as possible. But unfortunately, one of the consequences of the way that the Lib Dems have framed their package is that it will throw thousands of people out of work, because in order to pay for the £17 billion tax cut, and I just want to make the observation that the Lib Dems are going into this election offering more tax cuts than the Tories and more public spending promises than Labour, and also saying that they're going to be able to balance the deficit quicker than anyone else. But I think that one of the problems of what Mike is saying is he's actually talking about tripling capital gains tax. Now, I set up my own business from scratch, and I ran that for 14 years, and I think people who set up businesses and make money should pay tax and make a contribution to society. But one of the big lessons we learned in the 1980s is that we do need to encourage people to set up businesses. And if you triple capital gains tax, as these proposals actually do, you will be sending a signal to entrepreneurs up and down the country that actually this isn't a very good place to set up a business. And the cost in terms of jobs will be really appalling. And the other thing is, I mean, the Financial Times did a study, they said only 6% of that tax benefit actually goes to the poorest 10% in society. So it's not a particularly effective redistributive act. But the instinct to want to reduce the tax burden on the lowest paid is a good one. And I would just suggest to Mike that perhaps trying to stop Labour's increase in national insurance would actually be more effective at helping poorer people than his plans, which I think might have some very negative consequences.